Good morning, Facebook family. Welcome to Freedom Talk from the Avenue. We're excited that you're here this morning for our pilot of Freedom Talk from the Avenue, where we're going to have some conversation over coffee. We're excited about our guests that will be joining us today, as well as the host that will be leading us off through this conversation. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Pastor Milton Williams and Reverend Lula Williams, the hosts of Freedom Talk from the Avenue.
Good morning. Wonderful.
Good morning.
Good to be out there with you guys this morning. Indeed. Hey, Mom, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Isn't this kind of cool, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you guys who are watching out there, we're really glad to be able to host this little show today. As my sister launched out in this, she's kind of the producer behind the scenes, but nonetheless, we are here to pilot what may become, what is likely to become like a monthly show where we highlight some really important books that we think are necessary. Now, we kind of got this, or I kind of was, it's kind of dropped into my spirit because my mom really raised me to be a voracious reader. And all through kind of high school and growing up, trust me, my summers would be spent a lot of time. She'd get like a case of books and Black history books, and I'd have to like read all of these books and write papers about them. And so,
Stop telling on me.
and so it was a drag at the time, but it really did instill in me a hunger to learn and to read. And so as we grew older, as I grew older, me and my mom would have what we would call, well, from time to time, right, Mom, we would just have coffee.
Right.
Yeah. And so we would just over coffee, just talk about whatever was going on. If I had anything I was dealing with or anything interesting or something that was happening, we just have a cup of coffee somewhere. So this kind of thing, we just kind of bring into everybody. That's one part of it. But the other piece is that my mom is the chair of our History and Justice Committee at Penn Ave. And she, again, we recommend books to our church family throughout the year. And this is the one that we're going to deal with today is a really important one. So, Mom, why don't you say a little bit about that and kind of what launched us into this whole kind of thing?
Well, we originally were planned book readings just for the congregation. And we were thinking that this would be just that. But we're grateful that we're able to share with a larger audience. And we were going to share just through before COVID hit, of course, like something at the church. But now this expands our opportunity to talk about pertinent information. And we think that this book is especially engaging because it deals with a subject that we see happening even today. And it's called One Person, No Vote. And it's by Dr. Carol Anderson. And she does an amazing job of bringing to the forefront the struggle that the African American and minorities have had getting a chance to vote. Actually, the book is called One Person, No Vote, Voter Suppression That Changes Our Democracy. So, Pastor, you want to continue talking about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. So also, cool thing we want to do at the top of the show, and just want to shout out a few folk that I see on the line so far. Good to see you, Sister Turner. Bless you. Glad you're in the house. Sister Lavinia Lane is watching. Wonderful to have you with us. Thomasine Gaither, again, fam is in the house. Glad to have you with us. Cynthia Harris, one of my other big sisters. Glad that you are on this broadcast. Wonderful. Rory Jones, she's on our History and Justice Committee from the Avenue. So wonderful. Kia Smith Henson in the house. Wonderful. Bless you. One of our ushers. She gets it in when we have church. That sister gets it in. I love it. Siobhan Brooks is in the house as well. Wonderful. All right. So you guys keep coming in. If you're on the stream already, go ahead and like and share. what this page and this broadcast, because we want to get out here a little bit. So yeah, so we're here to discuss the book One Person, No Vote, and we're going to spend a little time just kind of laying the groundwork. We're going to invite in some other folk a little bit later on the call once we get going, and it should be really, really cool, awesome. Looks like we got a full complement of everybody that we're expecting. Great, great, great. And so we're looking to do that. Oh, other thing, top of the show, we want to do this because this is coffee and conversation. You know, coffee wakes you up, as you saw coming on, and my sister kind of lifted it up. She said, let's get woke together. So coffee kind of wakes you up. We're kind of building on that whole thing. So, and one of the cool, fun things we want to do about it is kind of shout out what coffee we're drinking. I'm a coffee drinker, at least 1 cup a day. If you're a tea drinker out there, you can get your tea as well. We're not mad at you. We're going to pray for you extra hard, but we won't be mad. But coffee drinkers unite. And we're going to talk. So I'm drinking a little Sumatra. We want to talk about what we're drinking. I like it bold. I like it strong. So that's what I'm on today, a little Starbucks blend. But then my cup, every cup kind of has a story behind it. And so my cup says, Dad's the boss. Got this on Father's Day, not this most recent one. Father's Day a couple of days ago. Since we
That's a great thought.
On the other side of Father's Day, my cup says Dad's the boss, but then in little letters it says Mom said so. And then on the other side it says Dad, the final word before Mom. So that's kind of lets you guys know the hierarchy in my house, that that even though I kind of have some say so in other places, here at the house I'm just another guy and Mom runs the show. So anyhow, that's my cup. Mom, what are you drinking from? Some one of your nice pretty China today, or what you got?
Yes, yes, I am. And I thought I was going to do Pike's Place Starbucks coffee, but I'm changed my mind. I'm doing Newman's Own um, coffee, and I'm using a coffee cup that was given to me by one of the members of our church when my husband and I were in Buffalo, New York. She and her husband had been married 60 some years, and she had started collecting cups as a young woman. And she gave me some of those cups. And I'm now using one of them. It's bone china. As you can see, it's a beautiful cup. And this is one of many that I have. And when I want to feel real special, I usually get one of these cups with some tea. So I hope you think this one is pretty. I enjoy this one.
Good.
Her name was Mrs. Anderson. She was a wonderful old lady, and she loved fine things. So I'm grateful that she handed down some of her cups to me. And of course, I continued to buy them over the years myself.
Right.
So this is a great hobby.
Right. So yeah, so we have a little fun with that. And so every guest that we bring in, every participant, we're going to ask you a little bit about what you're drinking. It's early, so we know it's going to be coffee. We're not going to be stressed out about that. Praise God. But it's going to be in the morning. We'll have a cup of coffee, a little bit, and then get into some books. Because again, my bishop always said that readers are leaders. And so you got to be reading. You got to know what's going on if you're going to be in the know. All of my colleagues are voracious readers as well. So, you know, from time to time, we'll be bringing guys on and some of my partners in ministry and friends in general, just to talk about good books. So this one particular is One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson. Now, if you don't have this, you need to get this. This needs to be in your library. Important book. Carol Anderson, a little bit about her. She's the Charles Howard Candler Professor of African American Studies at Emory University. So that's a major institution down there in the A. And her previous work include things like 2003 Eyes Off the Prize, which is a nice take on that little phrase. And it's the United Nations and the African American Struggle for Human Rights from 1994 to 95, through 55. Then in 2014, she came back with Bourgeois Radicals, talking about the NAACP and the struggle for colonial liberation. One of our guests coming on later might chime in about that title, but that's really cool. But that's spanning the time to 1941 to 1960. Then in 2016, Mom, what was her big book that she came out with in 2016?
A white rage.
Right. Yeah, so White Rage she comes out with in 2016, New York Times bestseller. And the subtitle is The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. In that particular book, she puts it in. You need to get that in your library too. If you don't have that, you need to get White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. Really powerful book. In there, she gives the history of African American civil rights, race politics, from Civil War to current times, from Reconstruction to Jim Crow to the Great Migration, and Civil Rights Movement. So she puts it down in there. And so now in 2018, what's the book again, Mom?
One person, no vote.
Right. House voter suppression is destroying our democracy. And so in one person vote, one person no vote, and we're just going to lay it out real broadly before we bring in some additional guests to help us talk about this. In a one person no vote, she deals with voter suppression specifically. And again, because this is so appropriate right now, because we're in the streets, we're protesting, which is critical. We're leaning on legislators and lawmakers in order to get legislation passed, and all of that's critical. But what is important, as much as we protest, what we also need to make sure we're doing is voting. So one of the responses to this moment should be a heightened awareness of why we need to be voting. And even as you're seeing these long lines and the conversations around mail-in ballots and how the general election is going to happen, and we're seeing some test cases in these various primaries going on, and some of the difficulties with that, is critical to know that we got to be voting right now. So this book is really critical. Now, let me shout out a few more people who have gotten on since we've gotten going here. And wonderful to have you with us, Sister Gwen Addison in the house. And as you guys check in, give us some thumbs up, give us some hearts. Again, like and share this, and folk that you know and who you're connected with. So good to see you on the Love Stream today, Sister Gwen Addison. We got Sharon Martin Weaver. God bless you, from the Seed Planters Ministry of Christ. Awesome. Thanks for checking us out this morning. Deborah Stallings, our CED director on the Avenue. Glad you're on the stream today. Came for coffee and conversation. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Then we got Mary Douthit again, a wonderful woman of God, also on our History and Justice Committee. She says she's drinking 5 Rose tea from South Africa. Good. All right. I love it. I'm going to pray for you extra hard, though, since it's tea, Sister Douthit. And so that's who we're working with right now. So keep on coming on, you wonderful people. Deborah Harris Williams, wonderful. She's on ginger tea, too. We're praying for you. God bless you. I do tea, but it's for my voice mostly. I got to make myself do it. But coffee's what I do. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this. For just a few minutes, we're going to bring somebody else on, right, in just a couple of minutes. But in one person, no vote, again, Carol Anderson makes the point of, under the guise of addressing voter fraud, she's making the case that the Republican Party has launched really a nationwide voter suppression effort. Talks about some tactics of voter ID laws. Which would be some of which reducing voter opportunities. We're going to talk a little bit about gerrymandering, some of these tactics more specifically, and even the national census. So that's another part that we don't talk about that much, right, Ma? A whole census piece. And there's a whole movement around making sure we're counted in the census. So we say this whole voter suppression thing and really this voter fraud, which is the rationale, with the pretext behind so many of these voter suppression tactics. Hey, Dorothy McFarlane, how you doing, my sister? Praise the Lord from the
Hi, Dorothy.
from the UK. Amen. Bless you. Great Britain in the house. Sister Rouse, God bless you, over our senior brigade. Good to see you too. So, Mom, so this whole voter suppression thing has been issued under the guise of voter fraud. Right. So that's what the Republicans, right wingers and conservatives would argue as to why they need to do some of these things. So from what you found out, how legitimate is that or not?
Well, I was listening yesterday to Carol Anderson's interview with one of the women from the Congress. And she was saying that all this looks very reasonable, but it so that's why they keep making these laws that it looks like, yeah, voter fraud is true, but
Right.
it's they make a very reasonable argument, and people sometimes begin to believe
Right.
that what they're saying, what they're doing is legitimate. While if one law fails, they keep uh, making it stronger and stronger and stronger, not only as legislators, but then the Supreme Court sometimes gets in there
Right.
and solidifies the things that they do. But it has a devastating effect, which we're going to discover as we listen to this discussion this morning. It
Right.
was very wonderful to hear Carol Anderson talking about it herself. And will you have a link from perhaps from our material that we've sent out that shows you how you can link to that interview with Carol Anderson?
Okay.
If we haven't sent it out, it will be going out, and you will really enjoy uh, finding out, or maybe be disgusted to find out
Right.
all the things that have been done in a very reasonable way
Right.
that have not been proven to be true in terms of their but how they say voter suppression is going on.
Gotcha. So right, exactly. So to Reverend Williams's point, Mom's point, I'll be calling her Mom and Reverend Williams kind of loosely, both back and forth. But so what my mom was saying is backed up by this analysis that took place in 2014. Professor Justin Levitt of Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. He analyzed voter votes basically since all votes cast since 2000, and with literally hundreds of millions of votes cast. Watch this. There were only 31, not 310, not 3,100, not 310,000, not 3.1 million. No, 31 incidents of voter fraud were found. That's since 2000 with hundreds of millions of votes cast. So there's no evidence at all for voter fraud. And so on a large scale. And so this is what you need to know as we get now into the first chapter, kind of laying out the groundwork of this book. This is what you need to know as right on the front end of what we're getting into. And this is going to help you really. Hey, Brother Clark, glad to see you in the stream. Sister Wade, bless you. This is what's going to help you get your head wrapped around this whole thing. This is what you need to know. All that's going on, these long lines, you basically hear Republicans and the person in the White House, I don't even like to say his name, but the orange person in the White House, that guy, already trying to throw a cloud of doubt on the incoming or the upcoming election in November by basically saying that the process of voting by mail, which would be very useful in this time of COVID-19 and social distancing and trying to be healthy, they're already trying to discredit it because they know if people actually vote, they will lose. So check this out. So these long lines, these unreliable machines, mostly in Black and brown neighborhoods, everything that makes it difficult to vote, hear me, this is why. It's because they never, ever intended you and me or women or even poor whites of a certain class to vote. They never, the founders never meant that. Trust me, right now, Thomas Jefferson and Madison are rolling over in their graves at the notion that former slaves, poor whites, and women are voting. They are losing it even in their grave right now. So it has everything to do with voter fraud, nothing to do with nothing to do with voter fraud rather, but all to do with a certain class of powerful, wealthy people retaining power. That's also what the Electoral College is about as well. And so we may get into a little bit of that. So now, just laying that out, we're going to bring on a few more folk to talk about this. Now, another thing I want to do with you right up top is um, a little quiz, and we're going to gift you guys if you can answer this question right. Now, there's one particular Chief Justice who has been pivotal in ensuring that there would be that votes would be suppressed. He's on the Supreme Court right now. He cast the deciding vote that did away with pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act. If you can answer that question of who this particular Chief Justice is, who cast the deciding vote to dissolve the pre-clearance statute in the Voting Rights Act. If you can name that justice, we're going to gift you a coffee mug from Penn Ave with a t-shirt inside of it. And we'll make sure you get that to us. So put on the comment section if you can name the justice who has been more influential than any other in suppressing the vote and in gutting. Oh, there we got it. Deborah Williams, you answered the question real quick. I don't know if we should give it to you, though. You on the committee and read the book.
The committee can participate.
So we might get you one, and we'll do one for a member and who perhaps has read the book, and we'll do another one for one who's a guest on the line. So anybody else can get John Roberts in that comment section first. We're going to do 2 cups today. All right. So voting and exercising. We're about to bring on 2 folk right now from the History and Justice Committee in just a minute. Is critical and it's important to the powers that be, which is why, as my mother was saying, they continue to over and over and over find ways in which to suppress the vote. And they would go to such, this is why fire hoses were necessary. This is why water hoses and sickened dogs on voters. This is why violence has been enacted against people simply for wanting to exercise the franchise. And that same Chief Justice, we mentioned it already. Sessions is incorrect, my sister, but he had a very critical role in intimidating voters, especially when he was down there in Mobile, Alabama. So that would be Jeff Sessions, Jeff Beauregard Sessions. So Chief Justice, though, said voting is so important because it is preservative of all other rights. So that means it undergirds everything. It preserve gives life to things or keeps things alive. So legislation that passes all has to be affirmed by voters. And so if we can control votes, we can control the laws of the land. And so that's why that's so critical. So, and very lastly, evidence just does suggest that GOP tactics have been working, because as recently as 2016 election, which was the first election since the elimination of pre-clearance, the voter ID law, this is in Wisconsin, deterred nearly 17,000 or possibly as many as 23,000 eligible voters in 2 counties from casting ballots. Now, guess how many the guy in the White House won by? Only 22,748. So conceivably, if the ID voter laws in Wisconsin had not been able to happen, Clinton would have probably taken Wisconsin. So anyhow, that's the critical piece of that. So now we want to bring in right now 2 members of our History and Justice Committee on the Avenue. They're going to speak more specifically to chapter 1 of this book. We just kind of laid out in broad swipes what we're looking at. So we got coming on right now, Dr. Larry Johnson. I believe he's around with us. Yes, Dr. Larry Johnson is in the house. When we hear from Dr. Johnson, typically he says to us, "Good morning." That's his thing. And so we'll go ahead and say good morning, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning.
Very good. And so Dr. Johnson is a distinguished professor at Morgan State University. He is a wealth of knowledge, loves history, loves God's people. And he's going to be one of our participants in the conversation around voter suppression and this book on today. We're also going to bring on, at this time, Sister Laverne Braxton, who is one of our trustees, also on the History and Justice Committee. Wonderful woman of God, loves our people, loves our community. She's a certified social worker and she works really closely with so many families and children in our school system. And they're on today to say a little bit about and help us in this conversation with voter suppression. So both of you guys, I don't know, Sister Braxton, Brother Johnson, are you guys drinking coffee this morning? What are y'all working with? Anything over there?
Well, just freshly ground coffee.
Okay.
It has to be freshly ground each morning. Loving it,
Okay.
loving it.
I love
And
it.
because it's a special day, I didn't know if I should use my favorite cup has a special shape or
Right.
go in there, carry it,
Harriet up there. I love it.
carry it.
Yes. Yes, we love Harriet. She's
Uh-huh.
indeed
Absolutely.
very nice.
Absolutely.
But Johnson, you working with anything over there where you just
No, I don't do cups in the morning, so it
all
wasn't
right.
even on my mind to do a cup this morning.
Okay, all right.
But
Such a busy man.
I'll do better next time.
All right, very
You're
good.
doing well.
That's
You're
what we'll
doing
do.
well.
So, all right. So in chapter 1, which is entitled A History of Disenfranchisement, Carol Anderson, again, the author, opens up the first chapter talking about voter turnout. She has to kind of acknowledge that this is something that is a reality. Now, as I'm getting into this, who we got? Walter Fields, wonderful man. This brother we might have to have him on the show, perhaps one of these next episodes. This brother is heavy. He's been heavily involved in so
Oh,
many
yeah.
things. New member of our church coming down to us from New Jersey, Melanie Miller. He's coming from her. Great loss for them. Wonderful gain for us. Sorry, my sister. But we're praying for that ministry continuing there. But Brother Fields is on here. Sister McGeamy, good to see you. Wonderful. Who else we got? Laverne Foster in the house. Wonderful woman of God. Antoinette Ford. Hello, hello, hello. Dr. Hubbard is well. Praise the Lord. Yes. So in chapter 1, Carol Anderson is talking about voter turnout. So when we reflect on and review the 2016 voting cycle that gave us the current administration, a lot was said about turnout, right? Turnout, 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 right, Ma? That's what the whole narrative. I think you mentioned that in the beginning, and how even some people just say that real quick. Some people even doubted that it was they pretty much blame Black folk for not voting, and that's why we got the situation, right? Is that right, Mom?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Absolutely.
But
So
we know there's more to the story, which
Oh,
exactly.
Dr. Sister Braxton is going to explore for us.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm going to throw to Sister Braxton in 1 second. So one of the biggest takeaways, again, was that Hillary lost because she didn't really excite or motivate or give us a reason to vote for her. Now, let me just say right there, because we're talking about the book, but we're talking about other things as well. Let everybody who's watching hear this. Uh, Nobody should have to turn you out to vote. It's 10 o'clock. Nobody should have to make you vote. Now, that's good and that's wonderful. And yes, we should have some commonality, obviously, with the folk we're voting for. But voting is a privilege and a right that our foreparents died for. So even if you don't like the cat, you need to be voting for somebody for some reason, just because that's just what we do. That needs to be our thing. We vote, no matter who's running, no matter what's on the ballot, we are voting. So that's what they say. We didn't turn out, so that's why Hillary lost. And they say she wasn't able to pull together the Obama coalition of African Americans and Latinos and young voters. And so, yes, it was true that 7% overall Black voter turnout did drop. So we got to keep it 100. That did happen, but that's not the whole story.
Thank you.
So Anderson makes the case that the lack of voting in 2016 was more than that, and voter suppression was the issue. So to talk about this more, Sister Braxton is going to help us. So, Sister Braxton, what
Yes.
beyond the voter turnout helps us get a fuller picture of the most recent cycle of election and what took place there?
Well, early on, several things. Several things immediately after Reconstruction. Even though we had the 13th Amendment and the 15th Amendment to allow us to encourage us to vote, in actuality, what we have was something called the Mississippi Plan. And that kind of plan or that attitude was pervasive throughout the country, where we were subjected, African Americans were subjected to poll tax. We were subjected to violence. We were subjected to, it was something like a reading, a literacy test. And the literacy test would be such that African Americans were given a document that was political. It was heavy, heavy, and their counterpart may have been given something to read, like, see Jack read? He can read. Do you understand that? And we would have to interpret this heavy document. And of course, we couldn't do it. Then registration itself would have to occur many months before the actual election. It might be 7 to 8 months before the election. And if you didn't do that, and if you didn't have enough money to register, back in the day, you all know when we came out of slavery, we were dirt poor. And I'm sure that's where that term came from, dirt poor. Nevertheless, we were charged as much as $700 in today's money, um, to pay to vote. These were difficult times. Moving forward, there, and I want to go move up to 1965. I want to take us all the way there, and anyone else can jump in, fill in where I left the void. But we talk about the international climate. We think about what other persons thought, other countries thought about what was going on in America, such as Emmett Till.
Right.
He was murdered, killed for supposedly addressing a female wrong.
Right.
What happened was this attitude was America's Achilles heel. Well, other countries were looking at us, other countries like Russia, and say, hey, they talk about freedom and democracy, but
That's
know
right.
that African Americans here in this time were murdered for little things such as believing to have whistled at someone else. That was hard. And being that as it was, we couldn't convince the rest of the world, our other brown country, and globally, the world was browning out, and this is still an issue for us.
Right. Right. So yeah. So America, you said so much there, um, Sister Braxton. Just the whole inception from the very beginning of, you got Reconstruction that took place after Civil
Yeah.
War, which was basically 1865 to 1876.
Mm-hmm.
You have newly freed blacks. You have folk voting, and you have federal troops enforcing 14th and 15th Amendment. All that's taking place.
Uh-huh.
And during Reconstruction, Mom, what were some other things that were taking place during Reconstruction? What were some important things that took place during that time?
Well, the irony of having a literacy test is amazing, because only 5% of African Americans could read. Because you remember, we were not allowed to learn how to read.
That's right.
And so to say to someone who has not been taught to read and been killed for trying to read, uh, 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 is ludicrous, because of course they couldn't read the passage. If the passages were read to them uh, by someone who probably didn't understand it themselves, of course they were not going to pass that. And so when you have denied people the right to learn how to read, and then ask them to read a passage and interpret it for you, it's a built-in failure. So the irony of that is just beyond belief, that people would be eliminated, and that your ballot, your registration ballots would be thrown away, balled up, thrown away.
Mm-hmm.
All these things are some of the things that they use to keep us from coming to the ballot box. And when you had people being shot if they did vote,
Right.
there was a minister, maybe in Alabama, Georgia, one of those places.
Mm-hmm.
He was a veteran, and he had decided that he could vote because he had fought in the war.
Mm-hmm.
But he, on his church, it was written, "If you vote, this will be the last time that you vote."
That's right.
Yes.
And he just couldn't believe that was true. So he voted, and the next day or so, four Caucasian men showed up with guns, and
Mm-hmm.
they shot him dead.
Mm-hmm.
And his mother carried him to the hospital,
That's right.
but because of poor health care, which we're still experiencing today,
That's right.
he lived 2.5 days and died right there in that place, not in the hospital, a special, the main part of the hospital, but in a room about the size of a closet.
That's
They
right.
put him in there and he bled for 2.5 days and of course died. So that's the kind of intimidation that was out there. And also things like how many bubbles is in a bar of soap. And of
Right.
course, who's going to get
Yes,
that right?
that's
So
right.
those are some of the kinds of things. And then we have a case of a person who spent money and years trying to vote, and when he finally thought he had passed the test and everything, his name was not on the ballot when he went to vote.
Right.
So, which is
That's
a
right.
further discrimination. So that's the kind of stuff that was happening during that time.
Absolutely. So we're going to go, and thank you for that. So we're about to go to Brother Johnson to bring up to share some other things out of the chapter. Again, a fascinating chapter. She's running through the whole history from Reconstruction, as Reverend Williams just said, talked about the importance um, of how some of the things that came out of Reconstruction, most mainly was public vote, public education. Uh, the public
Mhm.
education system we have now, again, which makes the irony of having to have these literacy tests so ironic, the fact that you have these literacy tests that were completely arbitrarily decided upon by the registrar. And no matter how sufficiently you did that, you would be kind of discluded or not able to vote for all of those reasons. And so you have that, you got Reconstruction. And in fact, based on, again, this whole idea that we should not have been voting in the first place,
Mhm.
particularly folk in the South had this attitude, and it was in the North as well. But one Texan was quoted as saying this. He said, and I quote, many Texans refused to accept the fact that the Negro was free and equal and stopped at nothing to prevent him from enjoying civic and political rights. And so there you have right there that they would stop at nothing. They instituted what was called the Mississippi Plan, which had all of these restrictions, poll taxes, that you had to even have a 2-year receipt of poll taxes. You couldn't afford those. You had to really have a white man to pay that for you and pay the white man for the poll tax. It was so many hoops you had to jump through with that. Arbitrary dates of when to pay, far out in the head. They knew, as Sister Braxton said, our economics were strained and stressed. So we didn't have money to just be laying aside for your poll tax. Then you
Mhm.
got how many bars of bubbles in a bar of soap, how many marbles in a jar. You got all these other tests, which were part of the Mississippi Plan, which worked so well that other states, and this is why I want Brother Dr. Johnson to chime in, that even other states began to adopt it, and like wildfire, it went through the South and really degraded and suppressed the vote. So, Dr. Johnson, tell us a little bit about, continue to help us with the Mississippi Plan, and then, of course, we know, as Sister Braxton shared, World War II was a game changer. Sister
Mhm.
back feeling that they had a right to vote,
Mhm.
feel good about themselves, and yet America and being exposed to the world, and America said no. And then during the Cold War, even the Russians were saying, you guys
Oh
talk
yeah.
about democracy, but then you won't even let blacks vote, and you're killing Emmett Till and all these kind of things. So Dr. Johnson,
Mhm.
why don't you chime in on some of the stuff about the Mississippi Plan and other tactics that were used?
Well, there was actually um, suppression before there was suppression.
Mm,
If you look at the poll tax, for example, that's been mentioned already.
mm-hmm,
I mean that is an economic factor.
mm,
All right, and of course,
Mhm.
blacks had already been suppressed economically, so there was no way that they could even afford to pay the poll tax, and they didn't own property, etc.
mm-hmm,
I went online and I found the receipt that Rosa Parks was given
Wow.
for her $1.50.
mm-hmm.
She paid for her poll tax in
Look at that.
1957. So,
Mhm.
um, so the economic factor was attached to the poll tax. The poll tax was the economic factor.
Mm-hmm,
And we mentioned already the literacy tests. All right, that's
Mhm.
educational.
That's
And
right.
blacks, as Reverend Williams, I just said, they were already suppressed educationally because they were not allowed to be taught how to read.
That's right.
Then there was another criterion, and that was the good character criterion.
Yes.
I mean, in our denomination, we have passing of the character. Okay,
Mm.
so in
Yeah.
this situation, who is passing the character? The
Mm.
oppressor is passing the character.
That's
So what
right.
chance does the voter have, in getting through this criteria?
Mhm.
So as I've already said, it worked so well in Mississippi that other states, mainly Virginia, Alabama, Texas, and Arkansas, okay, mainly adopted the Mississippi plan. Now, one thing that grew out of this plan was the elite voter, as
Mm.
we're told. All right, the elite voter, which
Okay.
was interesting uh, to uh, to suppress the black vote. All right, to the degree that they wanted, they had to disfranchise the ignorant and vicious white vote, as quoted in the chapter.
Wow.
So, a certain population of poor whites
That's right.
in the 2016 election were also disfranchised
Hmm.
and don't even know it.
That's right.
Well, maybe now they might begin to see, but at the time they didn't know they were being used in that fashion. It
Right.
says something about the psyche of a culture that would sacrifice their own to
That's right.
bring harm and detriment to others and to another culture.
That's right.
Mississippi Plan worked well because the states received results,
Hmm.
and they said they were staying within the bounds of the 15th Amendment.
Right.
Now, if you go online and read what is called the Civil Rights History Project,
Hmm.
that began in 2009,
All right.
it's an oral history collection.
Right.
There is a section on voting rights.
Hmm.
Carol Anderson shows us in her work in the chapter that
Mhm.
one of the key players in voting suppression was at the front door, at the table. That's the registrar.
Hmm.
A lot of voters were turned away at the polls by the registrar,
Hmm.
who,
Mhm.
if they were allowed to vote, the black person, destroyed the ballot once the black person left the site. Um, in 1966, for example, in Mississippi, uh, there was another lady named Rosie,
Okay.
okay, who went to the polls to vote, and
Mhm.
she was met by dogs. Well, she was not intimidated by the dogs, but when she got to the registrar,
Okay.
he recognized her,
Hmm.
okay, as someone he knew rather. He knew the family, and asked her, "What you doing here? You know better.
That's right.
Why did you come up here? You know better to
Yeah.
be here." So she voted anyway, but once she turned her back, he dismissed her vote. So the registrar was an important figure in the suppression.
Hmm.
Mississippi tried again after about 16 years to disfranchise blacks, but the Voting Rights Act and the Department of Justice foiled their attempts. That did not halt the efforts, though,
Right.
even because even some presidential administrations stated that it was not the states who were violators, but
Hmm.
the blacks who committed outright fraud that we've already mentioned, and that
Hmm.
has yet to be proven. So,
Mhm.
uh, with this history in mind,
Hmm.
it behooves us to not only register voters and do it early, but
Hmm.
also to get them to the polls and to vote. We have been doing that already for many years,
Hmm.
but because of the 2016 election and because of the upcoming election, we will have to have new strategies of our
Hmm.
own. before the vote, during the vote, and after the vote.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
That's so great, Dr. Johnson, man. You blessed us with so much great stuff there. Uh,
Yes.
what is so awesome or really so fascinating about this whole thing, yes, is that again, like I said off the top of the show, it was never intended for black
Mhm.
people,
That's right.
women, or poor whites to vote who were not of a certain class. And so as Dr. Johnson said, they would willingly, they don't want everybody to vote, not even all white folk to vote.
Mhm.
They want the original intent was for wealthy, affluent, land owning, white, affluent men from really the aristocratic class of Great Britain and England at the time, who came over to found this new world. They were really the only. So when you talk about we the people and life, liberty, and pursuit of justice, that really was not for us initially. And again, they would be
Mhm.
mortified if they knew all of us had all of these various voting rights. So we're about to take some questions, and I want
Okay.
Sister Braxton and Dr. Johnson to field most of these. But
All
one
right.
important thing that was understood, I'm going to quote this from the book. A historian, C. Van Woodward, concluded that the restrictions imposed by these devices in the Mississippi Plan were enormously effective. Watch this. It says, in decimating the Negro vote. He says, indeed, by 1940, hear this, shortly before the United States entered war against the Nazis, this is crazy, only 3% of
Mhm.
age eligible blacks were registered to vote in the South. Only 3%. Are you hearing what I'm saying? So they effectively want to wipe out all of the vote. And so they were so successful in doing it that it spread all over the world. So we're going to take some questions now. So if you got a question, drop it in the in the comment section. That we can comment on, or if even any comments that we can address or build upon as we continue to talk through this book. And if you got any Q&A, again, we're calling this portion, these couple of portions, when we take questions and open up a little bit to discuss what you guys have in the comment section. This is time for you to, again, this is coffee and conversation. This is time for you to espresso yourself.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question of Sister Braxton,
All right.
Yes.
and it's something that she covered very well before for us. It's about gerrymandering,
Mm.
which was also
Yes.
a tactic. And could you comment on that, Sister Braxton?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's an issue even now for us. It happened in Maryland recently with the congressional election, I believe, for uh, Cummings. But right now, I want to bring up the issue of what happened in, I think it was in Tuskegee, Alabama, many,
Yeah,
many years ago. Um, I think the year could have been, well, let's say it was the 40s. And what happened was the first election, or this election where blacks could vote, more than 500 persons of African American heritage voted, and we won the election. We even had African American to be elected in office. The next year, the next year, they were ready because there was gerrymandering, and they made boundaries for that district, that electoral district that had more than 26 sides. Can you imagine?
Mm.
26 sides. And do you know
Unbelievable.
how many African Americans were able to vote in that election?
How many you got?
Five. Do you
Five.
know how many? Five. Do you know how many Caucasians were eliminated from the voting? None. They were
None.
no,
all able to vote. This is important, guys. This is so important that we understand who we're working with, and know that they are in it to win it. When you talked about Jeff Sessions and the Chief Justice, they've been around for years. They worked in the Civil Rights Division, and their intent from long ago was to abolish, eliminate our right to vote. So,
Absolutely.
amen.
our right to
Absolutely.
vote. So
Yeah.
know it. So know it. We have to vote ourselves. We have to have others of like mind to vote with us. This is big. and we talk about Hillary. I'm like, oh yeah, she wasn't our favorite girl, but we know more than ever. She was better than what we got, you know, you know, far better than what we got. This guy's
Absolutely.
giving me a headache. But
Absolutely.
nevertheless, what it'll take is for me, our children, us to support our seniors. It'll take us to support other races, other communities to engage in this next election. It's important. Rain, shine, snow, and strong winds. We have to vote.
And it's so critical and thank you for that, Sister Braxton, because again, this system of white supremacy is so durable that it'll
Mhm.
just switch up its colors a little bit. It'll change it just a little bit. And so what happened to finally gut this whole the whole Voting Rights Act, when it finally has some teeth, because initially it didn't have many at all, and it
Exactly.
required you right to it required after the fact for you to bring a case, which of course they could lock up in litigation for years and years and years, and your case would never be heard. What put some teeth in the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was that the preclearance statute put the burden on the states. And it's so amazing, and why this is so critical, because watch this, back in 1941, when some of the laws would happen to be changed to strengthen the Voting Rights Act, and particularly the part about the Mississippi Plan talking about white primaries. It said this, and this is the mindset that you're dealing with. This is why it's important in the book. It says a Black Texan wrote, "One thing is certain. As a result of the Classic case," this is talking about United States versus Classic in 1941. So the tables are turned. Now it says the table. They're saying the tables are turned. Now we talking about the white folk who have been running everything, who
Mhm.
all been in control of all of it. They said because of this one case that they lost that actually put some teeth in the or did away with white primaries. They said that the tables are turned. Now the Negroes are on top. This is this whole philosophy of grievance that we have to work through now. And it says in the 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court affirmed the sentiment when it ruled that the white primary, though supposedly a private affair, when they ruled it couldn't take place. So this is the mindset that we're dealing with. And what it says, what they couldn't accomplish by law, then they got into the violence of it. And this is where you saw in 1873 the wholesale slaughter of African Americans in Colfax, Louisiana. Also in Wilmington, North Carolina. Just saw on the news the other day with the case that's taking place there, and the officers that were caught on tape talking about slaughtering Black people and a race war and a coming civil war. Know that in Wilmington, Reconstruction, integration was having some progress, but this was the only documented coup d'etat that overthrew the government violently in order to reinstill white supremacy and white control of Wilmington. And then and that was in 1898. And then in Florida in 1920, also resulted in hundreds of losses of lives, enraged that Black people voted. So when you are in a line waiting to vote, when they are making it difficult for you to use the voting machine, when they don't train, all the stuff that just happened in Georgia with the lines where people stayed in for 6 and 8 hours all day long, poll workers not trained on the machines. This is intentional. You need to know this. This is intentional. And so that's a little bit about that. So, Dr. Johnson, can you share anything else with us concerning any? I don't see any questions that we have queued
Well,
up.
I see one question from
Okay.
Mrs. Williams down in Charlotte.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
It's about how do we get brothers and sisters to know the importance of voting, and that's a difficult task. Uh, in the chapter 1, Anderson reiterates the line that in inaction is actually an action. All right,
Yes.
and we know that inaction can be more detrimental than the vote itself. So the question is, I mean, yes, how do we get people to understand that saying, "Well, it doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count"? That's part of the plan. That's part of the mind plan that uh, that you think that what you say and what you do will not matter, and it does. So um, I guess you have to uh, give them figures and Ms. Williams and talk to them and along with your other voting programs to let them know that doing nothing is worse than than the vote itself sometimes. In the last election, there are many people who did not vote because they did not want to vote for Donald Trump, and they thought that Hillary Clinton was not better choice either. Well, I mean, look where we are, and these last 8 years ought to be a lesson, all right, to anyone who says that my vote will not count. All right, if you
Absolutely.
are not moved, okay, to act after the experience in the last 8 years, then there is nothing that we can say or do, I don't think, that will change your mind because you have lived the experience to know that your inaction creates a kind of havoc that we do not want.
Absolutely. Let me give you some stats that Dr. Johnson just alluded to, and just real quick, and because we're about to go to another segment, but I just want to shout out Dr. Hubbard is saying some major stuff on here, talking about the vote and the color of freedom. Walter Fields is still dropping some stuff on us. Hey, Dr. Parker, good to see you on the line as well. Sister McGinney, bless you. Angela Maxwell Brown, wonderful. You're right. Gerrymandering still impacts the census, even with 2021. You're so right. Hey, Karen Austin, God bless you. Mallory, right in the house. Praise the Lord. Congratulations on my sister for the new gig that she just got. Awesome. And glad you're on here as well. She's going to be a new principal, or is a vice principal? Principal, vice principal. Correct me which one it is, Mallory. But we're so proud of you to see what God is doing. Yeah. So yeah. But check this out. And so some stats that Dr. Johnson was alluding to. Um, Hear this. It says that the tools of Jim Crow disfranchisement worked all too well. Hear this. In 1867, the percentage of African American adults who registered to vote in Mississippi was 66.9%. Now I'm telling you, so Mississippi has even still has the most blacks, I think, in particularly the country, most slaves and all that. So if all of them voted, they would be running Mississippi. But it's strange that they don't. So anyhow, it says that 66.9% were registered in it, but by 1955 it was 4.3%.
Yes.
Between 1954 and 1962, only 8 blacks in all of Claiborne County had managed to come through Mississippi's gums. It says those vote-chilling numbers scarred the southern electorate landscape. 5 counties in Alabama had 0 to less than 2% of African Americans registered. In Georgia, less than 10%. And as Dr. Johnson says, if we're not voting now, seeing the debacle in this pandemic response, seeing the economy that's breaking down and shuddering, seeing how poorly we've addressed all these issues of race and class in our society, your vote matters. This is why, from the very beginning, they never wanted you and I to vote. So these are critical matters and important for us to be about voting. So,
And if you think at this point,
mhm.
if you think going through now
Yes.
using a virtual learning atmosphere, I mean,
That is so true.
that's something that
Yeah.
to be said about that. I mean, it's nobody's fault actually. It's, there's a pandemic, but think about that. We need to find, don't just sit back. We need to find some way of helping these school systems to determine how they're going to get students back and to help them the way ours need to be helped, supported.
Absolutely. And one
That is
last,
true.
go ahead, sister. Yeah, chime in. Go ahead, sister Braxton.
That is so our
You close
responsibility,
out
our
this segment. We will
own
close it out on you.
response. That's our responsibility as a community to engage in social policies and to develop community-based programs that will help our students, because education was the key. And I tell you now, we're talking more about quantity than quality of education. It is
Mhm.
so important that we all engage and do what we used to do. Sometimes it's good to remember who we were and who we are. We are the reason why we have public school systems. Maybe we need to go back to teaching our own and teach an understanding about social policies and legislations and their impact on us as a community. That's what we have to help our young people to understand. We think about police brutality and defunding the police and social workers helping and mental health issues. We need to get back to who we are and developing programs for our community to help us to succeed.
Absolutely.
That's it.
So
But
well
this
said.
this book is rich. It is
Absolutely.
replete with information. It teaches you. I mean, you have to read chapters more than once, but it's good. This is what we need. I appreciate being a part of the process.
Awesome. Awesome. Mom, you got anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking, and it's interesting that Sister Braxton made that point. You know, the church has always been at the forefront of
Yes.
of our civil rights movements and anti-slavery movement, going back to those who escaped slavery and were members of even the A.M.E Zion Church. All of them were not A.M.E Zionites, but it reminded me of a scripture that says, "Our people perish for lack of knowledge."
Yes.
And so when I thought about that, it made me just appreciate so much what we're trying to do this morning and what we will continue to do, because our people have to know so that they know what they need to do to move forward. But that verse just stuck in my mind. Our people perish for lack of knowledge. And the church has always been in the forefront. Many times the people couldn't meet any place but at the church. And so we will want to reclaim our place again.
Absolutely. That's so great to kind of end this segment off with, Reverend Williams. Yeah, okay. So Mallory, oh, my man Malone Smith checking in. Grew up with him down in Mobile, Alabama, pastoring in Florida, doing a great work down there. So yes, for Mallory, it was assistant principal, but we know you're gonna make an impact in that school system. We're so grateful for that new opportunity for you. Talking about Angela Brown mentions how to explain the importance of down ballot voting. Let's keep that in mind for our next guest. We're going to have that person address that. We got a guest coming on in just a second. Barbara Shaw chiming in, also member of the Avenue, and also on this committee. I think she's going to be presenting on one of the chapters. Nonetheless, hey, Dr. Shaw, good to have you in here. Praise God. Got some good conversation going on here in the chat, talking about the ballots that come to your house and all that good stuff. So, yeah, that kind of helps segue us into this next segment. So, at this point, Dr. Johnson, Sister Braxton, we want to give you guys a really big thank you for helping to add some content, text, and flavor and some perspective to this chapter 1 of the book. We just think so grateful for how you all were able to speak to some of the issues that have come before us. So we're going to ask you guys to go ahead and wave bye to us, and we're going to bring on the next guest when you guys say bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
You're more
All
than
right.
welcome.
Thanks, guys. Wonderful. So that was so rich, and it's so wonderful how they were able to kind of bring us up to where we are now, which will help kind of segue us into some of the more contemporary, modern issues that we're facing with voter suppression and how we can actually speak to, as Sister Williams, a powerful Christian educator down there in Charlotte, mentioned, how do we actually sell this to our people, the critical nature of voting. And as we've said, if you're not paying attention to what's going on, what's at stake when we don't vote, what happens when we stay home, you're going to see it, or you should be seeing that right now. And so when you talk about now coming from the history of disenfranchisement, poll taxes, Mississippi Plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then you get into how the strategy of those who mean for you not to vote working. So check this out. What happens is, and this is the long view that typically Republicans and right wingers take, that the emotional folk who may align themselves on the left politically kind of lose sight of. They do stuff that takes a while to unfold, and you don't know what's happening until it kind of springs up on you. Isn't that right, Mom? They're really slick with it. They don't ever really quit coming at you. And so you see, in as we talk about John Roberts, how, and there were many other cases to challenge the Voting Rights Act. And each time they were losing these cases initially, but each time they lost a challenge to the Voting Rights Act, they would remember that, they would study up and come back a whole nother way. And basically the Supreme Court kind of helped them to know how to attack the Voting Rights Act. And so you got John Roberts, who clerked under William Rehnquist, who was also an avid person who did not want blacks to vote. And so he came up in that school. And so John Roberts has worked so hard and finally again cast that vote that initially that caused pre-clearance to be wiped out. And so we're bringing on right now an awesome brother, a brother beloved, wonderful man of God as well, but really active in the political space. He's the local branch president of the Baltimore chapter of the NAACP. He's held so many other positions and is just so civically engaged. And again, a man of God who has his irons in a whole lot of different fires and is really fighting a good fight in so many ways. He's also a good brother and a member of the oldest and coldest fraternity of all time, which would be, of course, the mighty A Phi A. And so we got my frat brother and the local president of the NAACP, Reverend Kobe Little, on with us. And we want to talk with him a little bit about voting, the initiatives and efforts from the NAACP and other organizations, and just overall why it's important for us to be getting out to vote in lieu of all that we've talked about here this morning. So come on, Dr. Little, say hello to us and just launch into why we need to be serious about this whole voting thing.
Good morning, Brother Dr. Williams. Thank you for putting on a fantastic and informative show. Mother Reverend Williams, it's always wonderful
Hello
to see
there.
you. And
Good morning.
we are forever grateful for the work that you and Bishop Williams have offered over the years in service of the kingdom and in service to our people. Zion is richer because you are in the way. I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying that this morning I enjoyed some Nespresso, Brother Pastor. And
I was going to come
this is my cup. This is my cup, and I just read the scripture: strength.
Yeah.
Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And of course, that comes from the book of Joshua, the first chapter, verse 9. And the Lord has told Joshua to lead the people into the promised land. Mm-hmm. It will not be without adversity or challenges, but I am with you. And it is and has been the case with us as a people. Through the capture and the Middle Passage and the violence of slavery, the Lord has always been with us. Through Jim Crow and the Black Codes, through mass incarceration and the repeal of the Voting Rights Act, the Lord has been with us. Yeah. This morning, it is important to tie all of this together. There's a lot of talk in the United States today about structural inequity, and we've seen the health consequences of white supremacy and structural inequity when it comes to the coronavirus and the disparate outcomes in terms of rates of infection, rates of admission to hospitals, and the mortality rates. But the truth is that even in this document called the Constitution, which was designed to provide a framework for what is billed as the world's first and most powerful democracy, even in that document, the Constitution, there are all sorts of forms of structural inequality and inequity built in. Whether we talk about the Electoral College or we talk about the classification of African Americans as 3/5 of a person, or we talk about the 13th Amendment, which puts itself out as an amendment designed to eliminate slavery, but actually says that slavery is legal for those who are incarcerated. And so we see a shift that brought about the end of Reconstruction, that period that had so much promise for African people to become full participants in the American democracy. We see that the Black codes came in and created a whole range of crimes, from loitering, which is just standing around because you have no place to go, to disrespecting white people, not getting off of the sidewalk. We see all of these crimes committed, which set up a situation where the government could incarcerate and, in fact, constitutionally re enslave people. One, providing economic opportunity for white plantation owners, and two, uh, reducing the capacity of African people to exercise the franchise. So we should be very clear that when we hear people talk about the potential of voter fraud has by and large never been a function of what African people have done.
That's
We
right.
saw in the Black Belt of Alabama and Selma and Marion that immediately after the passage of the voting rights in 1965, people like F.D. Reese, L.L. Anderson, Albert Turner, Marie Foster, and so many others began to organize African people in Alabama to register to vote. And at every turn, literally, Jeff Sessions and his allies attempted to thwart those people
That's right.
through practices of voter fraud, intimidation at the polls, intimidation in the registration process. And then Jeff Sessions, as the United States Attorney for Alabama in the Middle District, turned around as a Reagan appointee
That's right.
and prosecuted almost all of the leaders and many of the foot soldiers who
That's
marched
right.
with Dr. King in Selma, from Selma to Montgomery, to effectuate change and to open the franchise to African people. So this is a long-standing battle. It's clear. Anytime you ever hear anybody talking about voter fraud, remind them that there are laws that will allow us to investigate and prosecute voter fraud.
Mm-hmm.
However, a much greater threat is not voter fraud, but as has been said earlier, the greater threat is voter suppression. And we see it day in and day out. Just as the author has listed in the book, we see voter suppression through purging of voter rolls. We see voter suppression through voter ID. Now they've got exact name check. We see it in many, many, many ways. We see voter suppression in terms of people who have been arrested and placed in holding facilities but not convicted of any crimes, being denied access to the ballot, being denied the opportunity to register to vote. So we're very clear. The United States government and both political parties have been active participants in the voter suppression of African American voters. In the NAACP, we are spreading the message now, and have been for some time, that Black folks must vote like our lives depend on it.
They do, literally.
Huh?
Yeah.
We must vote like our lives depend on it.
They
Why?
literally do.
Because when we vote, it determines how we receive health care. When we vote, it determines how we receive education. When we vote, it determines how we receive economic opportunity. When we vote, it determines how the police officers use force, how they police our communities. It determines how the sentencing guidelines are established, and whether or not we are subjected to unfair, racially discriminated sentencing processes. It's incredibly important for us to vote. Now, I saw in the chat some people asked the question or made the comment that many folks say, well, why should we vote? Our vote doesn't count. Well, I think that the songwriter said that each round goes higher and higher.
Mm-hmm.
We recognize from the wisdom of the voting rights movement that we have to be committed to what another songwriter said, which was, "I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around."
Right.
When a miner goes to find gold, the first strike of the hammer and the chisel may not make a dent in the mountainside, but through persistence, each round goes deeper and deeper. And so if we had not had the first attempts to register to vote, then we wouldn't have ended up with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We wouldn't have ended up with Jesse Jackson running for president in 1984. We wouldn't have eventually seen the massive turnout in 2008 that elected Barack Obama. So we have to keep our eyes on the prize. We have to press forward towards the mark of the high calling. We cannot be conformed to the thinking of a Lindsey Graham or a Donald Trump or a Mitch McConnell. We have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds and remembering that, lo, the Lord is always with us, and we must press on in the cause of justice. So what does that look like for us in 2020? In 2020, across this country, all Black folks need to be calling for the capacity to have mail-in voting with access also to on-site voting locations. Even in Maryland, we're seeing Republican senators speak out against mail-in voting. This is another way to suppress the vote. We have to demand that governors all across the state, all across the country, allocate the resources to make mail-in voting accessible and available, while also maintaining some forms of on-site voting. We have to demand that those persons who are being held in incarceration and who are not convicted of a crime and therefore barred from voting be allowed to vote.
That's right.
In those states where persons who have been convicted of crimes still have the right to vote, they must have access to the ballot. And we must not buy into this line of reasoning that people who have been convicted of crimes should not be allowed to vote. We've already established that the whole point of criminalizing African people was to disenfranchise us.
Absolutely.
We already know that we have been subjected to far, far, far too many instances of over-policing, unfair convictions, and just outright being thrown in prison for no good reason, or worse, killed just for being Black.
Bruh, check this out. Let me ask you this as you continue to elate what you're putting out there with us. Got a great question in the chat. I want to throw this at you to kind of layer in some of the things you're saying. Dr. Hubbard wants us to look at this one, and this kind of hits us particularly at home here in Baltimore. It says, how do we persuade many Black people in the inner cities to vote when they say, I see these Black politicians, and yet the quality of my life is not changed? Baltimore is pretty much an all Black political town. This was an issue in the wake and Democratic town. This was an issue in the wake in the Baltimore uprising in the wake of the funeral of Freddie Gray. Speak to that a little bit in some of the other questions that you're throwing out. I mean, things you're addressing.
Absolutely. Let me just start by saying that we are on a long march to freedom. And while we want instantaneous change and we would like to see change in our lifetime, and it's possible and can happen, we have to remember that we're not just laboring for our own reality, but we are also laboring for the reality of generations yet unborn. Let's be clear. The Baltimore that Frederick Douglass was enslaved in is not the Baltimore that we live in today. Yes, the impact of white supremacy is real. Yes, we do have Black elected officials. But too often, Brother Pastor, we elect folks and send them to office. What we ought to be doing is electing folks and going with them. Because when we send our leaders to halls of power, we are essentially sending them to the lion's den. We are sending them to a forum where the interests of money and power set upon them and twist their arms and pressure them to succumb to their will and way. As voters, it is not enough for us to cast our vote in a primary or a general election. We must vote and then be vigilant. And so I can just say, as Sam Cooke and many others said, I know change is going to come.
All right.
And I can say triumphantly that we have already seen change. And in Baltimore, we have a very important opportunity with the nomination of new candidates for mayor and president of the city council to move this city forward in new ways. We must raise our voices on the issues of police accountability and transparency to stop police terror and police violence. But at the end of the day, we have to be steadfast and we have to engage our people. Listen, it's kind of like saying, why should we keep trying to share with people the gospel? Sin is still with us. The devil is still lurking to and fro, trying to see who he can devour. What's the point? But by God, my faith says that we must persevere. My faith says that we must hold on. My faith says that we must press forward to the mark. We must keep our eyes on the prize.
Absolutely. Yo, that's so good, Dr. Little. And man, you really said so much that is important to us. Now, I'm gonna throw this to you, and we're about to kind of let you go on the rest of your day. But you're blessing the stream today. But we got some really good questions that are really helpful. We got one that has to do with the Electoral College, that deals with obviously the fact that Hillary Clinton got over, I think, probably 3 million votes more than the winner. And the Electoral College, though, he was able to win. Then we got another question that has to do with developing candidates to represent our causes, given the amount of money needed to seek office. So I want you to kind of close out, giving us some information or some perspective on those couple of questions. Before you do this, though, I will say that, and it resonates with what you were saying about how we have to go with candidates into office, that voting isn't enough, and that our job after we cast those ballots is to hold people accountable, no matter what color they are. So even though we've got mostly black politicians and folk running things in Baltimore, people can be your color, but they may not be your kind. Meaning they may not have your issues at heart. And if they are a part of the machine that continues to promote things that don't change or make our lives better, then I believe as Black folk, we need to be more, we need to require more of politicians for our vote. We give away our vote, I think, too easily. And we need to really look closely at the platforms that folk are running on and hold them accountable to that. Because if they're not saying things that are important, we got folks in the street who are protesting, rightly so, with indignation about our government. And we need to be holding our politicians accountable for what the landscape of our life looks like. And so could you speak to the amount of money that's needed to run for office? Interesting thing on that, though, the biggest politician with the biggest war chest doesn't always win. As we could see in the most recent general election, Hillary had much more money, spent way more money than Mr. Trump. So yeah, speak to some of these things, the issue of the Electoral College and the issue of money in politics.
Thank you, Brother Pastor. I'm reminded of David facing off against the giant Goliath. I'm reminded of Elijah facing off against the hundreds of prophets of Baal. Might does not make right, and numbers do not always translate into victory. By God, thank you that God is on our side. Listen, I want to invite everyone to join us in the NAACP. If you live or work in Baltimore, please visit NAACPBaltimore.org and join so that you can be a part of our efforts to expand the franchise and to hold politicians accountable. If you live outside of Baltimore, please visit NAACP.org. Now, to the questions of the Electoral College, we should be clear that the Electoral College is anti-democratic. In fact, that was the whole point, to put in place a system that could override the will of the people if it was not the outcome that those in power thought should have been the outcome. We not only saw with the last election, but we also saw in the election of 2000 how voter fraud, a la hanging chads, can end up in court and then turn out to be in favor of the people who were committing the fraud in the first place. And so we have got to eliminate the Electoral College, and we've got to eliminate the outsized influence of dollars in elections. Democracy is about people, not corporations. Democracy is about people, not profit. Democracy is about people, not how much you can buy on TV to get your message out. And the way for us to do that is to register to vote and to get engaged and to support organizations like the NAACP that are doing this important policy work. I'd like to suggest that people take a look at fair elections work that we've been doing in Baltimore and across the state of Maryland, which creates small donor matching programs, which makes it politically unacceptable for candidates to take money from PACs and large special interests, and rewards them for taking small dollar donations from people who live in the jurisdictions where they're running for office. And those small dollars are matched by funds set aside by the government, so that candidates who are invested in their communities and who are speaking the will of their neighbors and other citizens will have a more level playing field on which they can compete against those with money interests. So I think there was one other question I wanted to address, and that was the question of young people. First of all, I want to give a lot of credit to our young people for the outstanding ways in which they have turned out and shown up in the last several weeks in response to this vicious cycle of police murder and terror. Our young people are woke, and they do see what's going on, and they want to know, and they want to demonstrate what can be done to bring about a better world. But as older people, we have a responsibility to support our young people as they show up as this generation's iteration and articulation of our freedom struggle. We should be supporting that.
That's right.
And we should be mentoring and guiding and offering them the insight and the instruction that we can give out of the wells of our experience. Listen, we have a multi-generational struggle. There is no young people versus old people. We're going to get over the other side of the Jordan by working together.
That's right.
And that's always how it has been, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
So we ought to be reaching out and embracing our young people, whispering words of encouragement and words of wisdom so that they can be equipped to take us the next step of the journey.
That's right. Hey, Mom, so I want you to respond a little bit to some of the things that Reverend Little mentioned, and we're going to be ready to pretty much close out here. We don't want to keep the folk all day long, and we're close to the end of our time. So Reverend Williams, if you could maybe speak to some of the matters that Reverend Little brought before us in the comments he just made, that would be great. I don't think she's with us. All right. Can she? All right. Well, maybe not. All right. So let me say this. We're about to wrap this segment and go about the rest of our day. But we do hope that we were able to keep you woke this morning with some information about voting. We're gonna this first chapter on one vote, rather one person, no vote. I want to read it just a little bit to us and hear some thoughts on it, and then we're going to be out of here. We're gonna right before we go, I'm gonna shout out some Black businesses that we're going to be wanting to support, and then we're going to be out of here. So it says, therefore, 2016 was the first election, and I saw some good stuff in the comments. Brother Fields mentioned Citizens United and how that needs to be overturned. Again, all of these are voting issues. We got to be voting for the people. This is why John Roberts said that voting was the preservative right of all of other rights, because Citizens United, anything that we're not happy about, the vote is what makes that change. And so as much as protesting is important, everybody who I was out there protesting in March, and everybody that was out there, you better be registered to vote, and you better show up to vote. No matter how long or how difficult they make it, you must get out there. So it says 2016 was the first federal election in 50 years held without the protection of the Voting Rights Act. As a result, the rash of voter ID laws, purged voting rolls, redrawn district boundaries, and closed and moved polling places were the quiet and barely detected fire that burned through the 2016 presidential election, evaporating millions of votes and searing those who hadn't even been under the original VRA. In Wisconsin, for example, Black voting rates plummeted from a high of 78% just in 2012 to less than 50% in 2016. It wasn't just about us turning out. It were some structural things in place to ensure that your vote did not count. It says in Milwaukee County, which is overwhelmingly African American, 50,000 fewer votes were cast in the state that Donald Trump won by, hear this, only 27,000 ballots. Meanwhile, Republican officials in North Carolina congratulated themselves, saying African American early voting is down 8.5% from this time earlier, 4 years earlier in 2012. So not only have the tide of expanding the franchise and the robustness of American democracy apparently turned, but its ebb continued. For during the 2017 special congressional election in an Atlanta suburb, for example, the Christian Monitor asked, what's behind fewer African American voters at the polls? And polling expert Nate Silver was puzzled that 14% drop off in the number of blacks voting had been even greater than expected. Now, hear this. This is the quote that Carol Anderson wanted to leave you with. It's puzzling only if you don't understand how the various methods of voter suppression actually work. It was intentional. 2016 was intentional. And so, Mom, are you with us over there?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm listening to it.
So speak to that. We're about to end the segment, and we're going to let Dr. Kobe say just a few closing thoughts, but I want to hear from you and then Dr. Little, and we're going to be out of here.
Yeah, the numbers are amazing in terms of how suppression has affected our voting. I think that what we need to continue to do is to persist, even though some of the things that they have mentioned, like Sister Carol mentions about voter ID and that kind of thing, and they managed to suppress us by deciding upon which ID they will use. One of the stories in the book talks about they studied the ID that Black people use and minorities, and decided that they could not use those. So they came up with another kind of ID that was not easily accessible to Black people and to other minorities. They closed down voting places so that it's only available 1 or 2 days a week out of a month or something. And then even for when they decided that you had to have a driver's license, that also was a problem because they closed up DMVs that were in the Black community, so that some people would have to drive 250 miles to get a driver's license, which a lot of people do not have that live in the cities because they don't drive as much as others. So voter suppression is alive and well, and is studied so well that it does have an effect. Carol Anderson also said they are winning at this point. But when I reflect on what Dr. Little has said, we can make a difference. We can change that, but we have to be persistent. And so that's my message, that we are persistent in our pursuit of getting the vote, and that we continue to realize the value of programs like this that educate us in terms of how we can respond and why we must.
Absolutely. So well said, Reverend Williams, and thank you so much for all that you've shared on the stream today. Dr. Little, give us just a couple minutes, and we're going to be out of here on some things upcoming we need to be thinking about, some of the issues that might be important to us, and just some general closing thoughts on this whole idea of voter suppression.
Right. I just want to underscore the point that I was making about the importance of intergenerational approaches to our freedom struggle. And it occurs to me that here in the Freedom Church, we have Dr. Williams, the mother, and Dr. Williams, the son, modeling the very point that I was making about how this is an intergenerational approach. And as your girls emerge, I know that they will be standing right there on the protest line and also in the policy forums with you. And so I salute you all for not only raising these important issues, but also modeling approaches that we ought to be employing. Listen, without reservation or hesitation, we should all support universal franchise,
You can hear
which is
all
to
that
say
stuff.
that everyone without excuse or limitation should be able to vote. That is what a democracy is.
That's right.
And to the extent that laws are broken, we have laws in place that can investigate and prosecute, and then, if necessary, administer punishment for a violation of the law. But we should be affirmative in our embrace of every person's right to participate in our democracy. And anything short of that is simply white supremacy,
That's right.
as as the book demonstrates and as our history demonstrates.
That's right.
And so, I'm reminded of something that my mentor, Dr. N.H. Smith, a founder of SCLC and a former president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, he would say that America's creed and America's deed are not aligned.
Hmm.
And we have to get to the place where if the United States says that it is a preeminent democracy in the world, that it actually not only touts that creed, but indeed shows that it believes in democracy.
Yeah.
If we were to have election monitors come uh, from countries in Africa and South America and Asia to observe the elections in the United States, the report that would come out of those election monitors would be scathing.
Absolutely.
And without reservation and with all of the energy that we cheer football and basketball and baseball teams, we need to get out here on the front lines and protest, but also stand in line to cast our vote and to be a part of the policy conversation. So again, thank you all for having this conversation. Thank you for advancing this issue forward. And let us pray and move our feet. Let us pray that our people hear the message and vote like our lives depend on it. And let us move our feet in organizing our folks so that we vote like our lives depend on it and get our numbers not to 78, but to 100% participation
That's right.
in the voting process.
That's right. Awesome stuff, man. Thank you, Reverend Little. Again, that is our local president here of the NAACP branch. And my brother is so, as much as he is informing us here on this morning, he's about the work of justice and about equity and about reform and about our people being able to live these lives that are so touted about in our founding documents. Those weren't initially meant for us, but Black Americans refused. In fact, I love some things I've been reading here has talked about how African Americans are actually probably the truest Americans, are the most democratic, because we've made this country honor its promises to its people. And so with a persistence that wouldn't let us give up, we made America be America. And so thank God for all you all on the stream today. Real quickly, Stephanie Holmes, thank you for being on. Nick Collins, yes, says research all candidates. We need to definitely be doing that. Talks about Rory Jones, yes, powerful discussion. Bless you, thanks for being on. Fields, yes, great discussion. So many good things were shared. Hey, Sister Wainwright, wonderful to you. And even my wife is chiming in. Wonderful program. Great job to the hosts, guests, and producers. Wonderful. All right. So, guys, get this book. It's important. You got to have this in your library. Not just this one. You need to get Our Time Is Now by Stacey Abrams. She talks about some of these issues overlap in her book, but you need to get that as much as things were shared about NAACP. You also want to Her website is, I think, fairfight.org, something like that. But nonetheless, all these things are important. Now, we're going to circle back around here. Again, our book club is going to continue to do their work. The second chapter has to do with specifically with voter ID. Third chapter talks about voter roll purges. Chapter 4 talks about rigging the rules. Chapter 5 talks about resistance. Our book club is going to work through all those things, but we're going to circle back with another show to wrap a bow on that, because we'll be closer to the election, and we want to really encourage you and even give you some even more hard and fast directives as it relates to voting. But before we sign off, again, we want to thank God for Reverend Kobe Little. We want to thank God for, again, my frat brother and awesome man of God, my mom, the Reverend Mother, the Reverend Lula G. Williams, former supervisor, is now wearing.
It's keyed into yours because it's your voice. Okay. Yeah.
My mother now is wearing the hat of now grandma and social justice warrior and all of those things above. And so she just continues to keep us inspired. Keep her in your prayers, because even right now she's a warrior. Many of you all know that she's working through cancer, but the devil's a liar. She's taking chemo and working through all of that, but she's still on this love stream talking about justice, even in this season of her life. So take that as an inspiration. And also, we wanted to make note of the fact that for readers who are still are seniors who are readers and who may have some difficulty in seeing, our church is going to be making some efforts to try to secure some audible.com subscriptions for you so that you can hear these books. So your learning isn't over. We want to make sure that happens. And so making that happen. We thank
Can
God.
I just comment,
Yeah.
son, if I hadn't had an Audible, I would not be as familiar with this book as I am, because One Person No Vote is on Audible, and that's how I reviewed it over and over again. So you'll appreciate if your site is compromised to have that device.
Absolutely. Sister Braxton, again, thank you for being on. Say goodbye
You're
to
welcome.
some closing thoughts you may have.
Well, like I said earlier, this is a book to be read by many. It's informative. It'll educate you and inspire you to be a part of the actions and the steps we need to take to increase the vote. Get them out, y'all. Get them
Very.
out.
Dr. Johnson had to run. He had another obligation, so he was on about his day. But this was our group today, and we're really glad about that. Thank you, all of our viewers who chimed in, and your questions were wonderful, and thank you for engaging us online. Now, as we close out, again, we want to shout out the local Black businesses. We're dealing with, again, coffee and books here. And so, and we're going to look at some ways in which we can bless these ministries along the way. But yeah, put that up on the ticker. We got Vagrant. I looked on the Black businesses in Baltimore, and there's a list of them. Of course, we want to make sure you get that. Shop Black, I think is .com is one of the sites you can go to. But on there, you'll find a coffee shop called vagrantcoffee.com. We want to shout them out today. Any coffee drinkers out there, they got wonderful pastries and coffees, great reviews online. Go to vagrantcoffee.com, check them out, be a blessing to that local business. As we support local Black businesses, we're supporting ourselves. So yeah, on here, we're talking about things that America owes us as citizens, and they do owe us so much, this and so much more, not only the vote, but so many other things. Not only do they owe us, we owe those things, also some things to ourselves too. And we need to be supporting our businesses and small businesses, especially. So Vagrant Coffee is one. And our bookstore that we're highlighting today is Everyone's Place Bookstore, also in Baltimore. Now, they do have some restrictions on your ability to kind of flow and peruse the bookstore as you typically might, but they're still open and they're doing business. You can call them ahead of time. I think most of the things you can pick up, or you call ahead and you pick it up from their order only kind of work going on with them. But nonetheless, still, they're open and they need your business. Both of these guys, vagrantcoffee.com and Everyone's Place Bookstore, are some Black businesses that you need to be supporting right now. And again, we're going to be sowing into those businesses to see that they make it through a tough time. So those are what we want to talk about today. Sister Williams, we're going to get you your mug for answering the John Roberts question correctly and your t-shirt. Did anybody else chime in with the right answer either? Because we wanted to bless somebody in the house and somebody else who was on here viewing. But nonetheless, If you could put in John Roberts, that first person that we find after Deborah Williams, who is not a member of our church, we're going to send you a mug and a t-shirt from our church. So put your information in there and we'll make sure that happens. All right. So I think we're done here, right? Wonderful. So if we are done, again, thank you for this pilot show of Coffee and Conversation. Let's get woke together. Amen. This is Freedom Talk from the Avenue. We're so glad that you were able to spend your morning with us, and you'll see us from time to time on here with more Freedom Talk from the Avenue. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace. We'll see you next time. Love and freedom.